So some breaking news that happened was that Quin Snyder stepped down from being the Utah Jazz's head coach. Now, on Sunday, he resigned after 8 seasons with the Utah Jazz. Second most wins as the Jazz head coach with 372, trailing Jerry Sloan, who has 1,127. He was a long-time Jazz head coach. And where do the Jazz go from here? Where does Quin Snyder go from here? Why do you think he decided to resign out of nowhere? We kind of saw it coming. We kind of saw a glimpse of it. But why do you think this ultimately happened?
I'll tell you what. You may say we may have saw this coming. I was stunned. Because you know what? Quin Snyder is running from the grind. And I was on this show a few weeks ago saying how if he were to entertain the idea of going to the Spurs, he's running from the grind. He has a situation where he was just the top seed in the Western Conference last season. They wildly disappointed in the playoffs, losing to a Clippers team that did not have their best player. And then you come back this season, you underwhelm again, you don't add any type of piece that is fixing your core problem, which is the lack of perimeter defense. He lost faith in this team, and he is running from the grind. And it disappoints me, where also you have Donovan Mitchell coming out and saying that he was unsettled. Yeah, completely taken aback by this, blindsided by Quin Snyder stepping down. And listen, I get it. If I'm Quin Snyder, I get it. The front office has failed to bring in talent to coincide the pieces of Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert. And that duo really is weird, where you have an undersized guard who is very, very good at what he does, but defense-wise, he's not that great because of his size. And then you can't pair him with any type of perimeter defense. And you have Rudy Gobert, who's amazing on defense, who just provides a just minimal offensive input. What really was Quinn supposed to do? I'm disappointed that he is deciding to not stick it out with these guys, especially that Donovan and Rudy are still on the squad. But now it's going to start to see pieces fall into place where now maybe we see Donovan leave. Now maybe we see teams interested in Rudy Gobert. This may be the downfall of the Utah Jazz.
Yeah, it seems like it's the final nail in the coffin for the rebuild. Just because, Snyder, if he knows things about the organization, if he knows things about these players, he's not going to want to coach a team that's terrible. I mean, he is a good coach. He's not going to get fired because he's done a good job with the organization. But if Gobert gets traded, if Mitchell gets traded, there's really nothing there for him to build off of. And I just think he's looking for a better opportunity with the head coach that he is. If he waits out a year and Popovich retires and he takes the Spurs job, I mean, you can't really fault him for it. It's not a great look for him, but I think that's probably what he's hoping to ultimately do. So to me, it just points to all the rumors we've been hearing about Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert. I feel like it kind of more solidifies those if he doesn't want to coach a team without those guys.
I'm the biggest advocate for the Utah Jazz rebuilding. I want to get that out the way right now. Will they rebuild? They won't rebuild. I'm certain of this. It's a hunch.
I thought you were a little high
based
on Utah.
Based on what I've been reading. First of all, let me get Quin Snyder out the way and talk about him a little bit. They have the longest postseason streak in the Western Conference with 6 straight appearances, but they have never made the Western Conference Finals or the NBA Finals. The Jazz, the past 2 years, have gone through a lot of changes. Ryan Smith is now the new owner. Danny Ainge is the president of basketball operations. And the Jazz ownership spent weeks trying to convince Snyder to stay. But ultimately, he said he had 2 years left on his deal, but he said that he feels like the players need a new voice in the locker room. And he didn't leave because of dilemmas or because of other philosophical reasons. He just feels like they need a different voice. To me, it feels a lot like Brad Stevens stepping down from the Celtics head coaching position, now going to be the president of basketball operations, and now letting Ime Udoka be the head coach. And you can see now that the Celtics needed a new voice in the locker room. I think that's what Quin Snyder is pointing at. But I don't think they're going into a rebuild. At first, when I saw this, I said, yeah, Quin Snyder's leaving because he doesn't want to be a part of a bad rebuilding team, especially in a small market. But I really don't think he wants it. I think he just wants to change the scenery. I don't blame him for it. He knows this team can't win a championship. If I'm a head coach, I am not staying somewhere where I know I can't win a championship. And I've done all I can already. This Utah Jazz team has gone full circle in their play style. I mean, at first, they were just a defensive-minded team. Offense was secondary. Now they have taken this all-offense approach, and now the only thing holding their defense together is the presence of Rudy Gobert. Donovan Mitchell described as unsettled and unnerved and wondering what it means for the Utah Jazz's future. Personally, there have been candidates that have been released that the Jazz are looking to. Terry Stotts, Alex Jensen, who's the Jazz assistant coach currently, Johnny Bryant, Knicks assistant, Kevin Young, Suns assistant, and Charles Lee, Bucks assistant. It's very early in the process. My gut feeling is that Johnny Bryant is going to be the next head coach for the Utah Jazz. He has a very strong relationship with Donovan Mitchell, and Mitchell is going to stay in Utah because of Johnny Bryant. That's why I feel like they're not rebuilding. I feel like they're going to go get Johnny Bryant. Mitchell is staying in Utah, even though I would love to see him in Miami. I would love to see that happen.
What about New York?
I'm not the biggest fan of that. I'd rather approach the Knicks rebuild in a different way.
100% I agree.
But I think Donovan Mitchell will stay because Johnny Bryant will become the head coach. And to get this team better, I mean, they need to trade for a wing, whether it's a guy like OG Anunoby or Jeremy Grant. They need to trade for more defensive-oriented players.
For sure.
I think the first trade chip is Bojan Bogdanovic. I feel like he is a guy who's a tweener. He's too slow for the three. He's not quite big enough for the four. He's a great offensive player, but defensively doesn't offer you much. Mike Conley, getting off of him if there's a possibility because he's been regressing rapidly. That's a huge thing for them. But I think that they're heading towards a different era, but I don't think they're rebuilding. They still want to compete.
We spoke about it a little bit last week with the whole less is more theory. Trading Bojan might be that type of piece where you have Bojan who has a very nice offensive skill set, but you might need to trade him to get assets that fit what you actually need to compete against these higher level teams. But ultimately, I understand what you're saying where there's a new voice, and we saw it last season, or this season, excuse me, with the Boston Celtics and Brad moving up and Ime coming in. But until I see moves made that are going to benefit this roster and actually fill the holes that aren't necessary to compete, I'm going to be very active with saying that they need to rebuild.
And when talking about Quin Snyder, I have 4 teams here. Spurs are an option. We talked about that before.
Of course.
The Hornets are an option, but I feel like they're fixated on Mike D'Antoni and Kenny Atkinson. The Sixers are out there. Do they fire Doc Rivers and now bring in Quin Snyder? But for me, I feel like it makes too much sense for the Brooklyn Nets to fire Steve Nash and hire Quin Snyder.
Interesting.
Steve Nash has not proven to be a good head coach. I feel like what the Nets are missing, we know they have the talent, Kyrie, KD. You add Ben Simmons into that. He's talented. Although he gets a lot of hate, he's still a good player. You now bring in a great head coach in Quin Snyder. He can take them over the top. I feel like Steve Nash, has he gotten dealt the right cards? No, he hasn't. There's been a lot of bad luck happen to him. But I feel like from what we've seen, we can make an educated guess that he won't be as good as a head coach as Quin Snyder. Bring in a proven guy to lead your franchise to go win a championship. Don't stick with Steve Nash because of stubbornness, because you want to look and appear to be right. Go get a guy who's going to make you look like a genius, and I think that's Quin Snyder.
One thing I'll say is I don't want the Nets to go through a situation similar to the one that Jason Kidd went through, where Jason Kidd had Milwaukee on a increasing trend, and he was a part of Giannis's ascension to being eventually the best player in the world. He had a hand in that, I should say. Majority Giannis, but of course, Kidd gets some credit. Now Kidd leaves, gets fired from Milwaukee, goes back to coaching, and now he's one of the better coaches in the NBA. Now, I'm not saying that Steve Nash can have a similar type, or is going to be.
His first stint was with the Nets, though.
For sure, 100%. But even still, where he had success in Milwaukee, still gets canned, and now he's on the Mavericks, and now he's one of the best defensive-minded head coaches we have in the league right now. Steve Nash, like you alluded to a little bit earlier, has been dealt a very, very unfortunate hand. And he's had to adjust on the fly, and yes, he hasn't done a great job of adjusting, but we're still in the early parts of his coaching career. It would be a shame if they decide to cut ties too early and he ends up going to another location and being a great coach.
I'm pro the Nets getting rid of Steve Nash for any head coach. And if you have the opportunity to get Quin Snyder as his replacement.
Coach,
of course,
easily.
Quin Snyder, I can't blame you too much.
Elite level coach.
If you're thinking for the long run, Steve Nash, he's still a brilliant basketball mind, and I feel like it's inevitable that he does make it work.
As a head coach, I mean...
No, he's been bad. I can't say you're wrong, but he's been dealt a tough hand.
I just think the reason he was hired was not to be a head coach, just to sort of fill the role and be a player that Kyrie and Katie can relate to and not necessarily be a huge overbearing locker room presence and be a great basketball mind. I think he was there for the player relations and to appease Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving.
I feel like we've just seen so many players come in and be head coaches and have success in doing so that it makes it hard to believe that that's ultimately the case. But yes, that's been some speculation that he's been there just to be a face and just to have just to have that title placed by his name. But ultimately, I've seen too much success out of these player head coaches where it's going to allow me to think that he's just a guy filling a spot.
Player head coaches that have had past experience, though. Steve Nash went into the job with no experience.
Very true.
Like, no coaching experience. Like,
No, you're right.
Ime had years on years of experience. Jason Kidd went straight into coaching, but he failed as the Nets head coach at first.
He did. But that's exactly my point with Steve Nash.
Yeah, but I don't think, Jason Kidd, it took a while for him to get on track.
It
took a while.
It did.
And we're now just saying he's a good coach, but it wasn't like that for 8 years.
You make a very, very great point, because once Jason Kidd took that assistant job with the Lakers, then it allowed him to really learn the ins and outs of being a head coach, and now we're seeing him reap the rewards. So that's a very great point.
And I also think having Luka helps.
Yeah, but his mentality and what he wanted to focus on was showcased night in, night out with the defense.
You're definitely right. But you look at Ime, just Tyronn Lue, like, they all paid their dues. Monty Williams,
for sure.
They paid their dues. I think it's a no-brainer for me if I'm the Nets to get rid of Steve Nash. I know they want to co-sign him. If Quin Snyder wasn't out there, I would be like, okay, you can stick with Nash for one more year. But Quin Snyder, as elite of a coach as he is, you just can't let that slip away.
I get it.
You can't let that slip away
for sure.